Well, I would prefer to be doing this in the comfort of my own office, but I was just on the way out of the house this morning and the postman shoved a packet in my hand. So I'm sitting in a cafe, tearing into it. It's about the size of half a bag of sugar, and I'm hoping it's going to be my much anticipated Oblique Strategy cards. And there we are, in a lovely black box, a bit like a sort of mini coffin, and in gold writing on one side, Oblique Strategies. And I'm going to take the top off, and I am now going to take the first card, which is Be Less Critical More Often. Might have another one actually. Second card, Disciplined Self-Indulgence. Might just have one last go. Third card, third time lucky. It says on it, Is it finished? No, I'm just starting. Oblique Strategies cards were first developed by artists Peter Schmidt and Brian Eno in the early 70s, and by far their most famous run-out was in the making of David Bowie's legendary Berlin trilogy of albums, produced by Eno. When I was at college, there were a couple of hippie-ish guys in the tower block next door to where I was staying, and they always had the curtains drawn and everything, and they used to talk a lot about doing things by the cards. And I didn't really know what they meant. I thought they meant tarot cards or a Ouija board or something. Anyway, I was round at their place one day. On the coffee table next to the bong and the Dungeons and Dragons board, there was a pack of cards. And I turned the top one over and it said something on it like, make the background the foreground. And they were full of these little gnomic utterances, and it was only more recently when I've been reading about Bowie and Eno that I came to realise that they must have been Oblique Strategy cards.
Oh, we can be heroes just for one day.
I just wish there was a world-renowned musician on hand who'd worked on those Berlin albums to tell me about how the cards came into play. Oh, hang on a minute.
Hello, my name is Carlos Alomar. I am a world-renowned guitarist. I was doing a song. I picked a card, and the card simply said, think like a gardener. The immediate impact of the thought, of course, throws you off. I think that's the purpose. It's like when you're feeling a pain in your foot and someone slaps you in the face. You're not feeling the pain in your foot anymore. I started thinking, how would I make things grow? So it allowed me to look at the sessions a little bit differently. I kind of let my guitar parts develop into being what they were. Plant something, nurture it, water it, let it grow.
That trilogy of albums, Low, Heroes, Lodger, would they sound different if those cards hadn't have been around at the time?
Totally. They would have been totally different. Usually you would have maybe a demo or some song. Well, this didn't quite work out like that, in that there was nothing really perceived. And once we did start putting things down, it was, please count to 100. And so we would record the numbers from 1 to 100. When I come in to perform, he's asking me to play from 33 to 42 and then stop playing. You don't know what you're doing. Everything that you know is offset because you're not understanding where it's going in the whole.
Do you think if the listener knows that the cards have been used, do you think that makes a difference?
And I think that's rather an impossibility. They're very curious cards. Let me see. Take the thing that you hate the most and amplify it. Take the most improbable and make it probable. I mean, these thoughts actually are seeds that are in your head, and the first thing that you say is, what the hell are you talking about? Which is actually what I said. And because it's so absurd, and because it has no place in your usual consciousness of production, you kind of fluff it off, but it's already been seeded. And so you constantly say to yourself, what the hell was he meaning by that? One must question why, and one must question what if.
So, what if there was another card turner out there who would help put on the current Bowie exhibition at the V&A? Like Paul Morley, for instance.
They would choose a card and they wouldn't tell each other what the card was, and Eno would have one card that suggested perhaps that he tried different things, and Bowie would have a card that suggests he tried the same thing, and they didn't know which card they had, and they would each enact something, a mix or a texture. For me, in many senses, the producer of the albums was the Oblique Strategies, because you just get that sense of everything constantly dissolving, which somehow reflects the fact that they were consulting these cards. It sounds a bit superstitious, like they were following their horoscope or something, but I quite like that. And somehow it never seems fixed. Even the song come, almost the world's anthem, like Heroes itself. For me, you can definitely hear the randomising of the Oblique Strategies. Eno, in a way, was distilling and doing versions of other people's ideas. You go to John Cage using the I Ching, or Marshall McLuhan and his early warning system. That flattered Eno and Bowie as well, that they were in a tradition of surrealism and Dadaism and Fluxus. It took them outside just being rock stars.
I read somewhere that Eno had talked about trying to use these strategies in the studio because he'd noticed in studios that people panic. They're up against a deadline, and when people panic, he said that they take the head-on approach, which usually produces an ordinary but acceptable result. And I suppose in trying to do something through the Oblique Strategies, you're trying to produce the extraordinary thing. In writing, patterns become established and you fall back on them. They are, in creative terms, the paths of least resistance. They're like tracks in the snow, and you tend to follow them. And the more you follow them, the more deeply ingrained they become. And they become ruts, actually. You get into a rut. And I'm interested in these cards as a way of finding another track, another path, even if it feels counterintuitive or even alien. It's as if you're asking the blood in your brain to flow in a different direction, or those electrical impulses sparking and flashing and travelling through our brain, through the synapses. To open up a new network. You're asking and it's hard to do that on your own. You need some kind of trigger, some kind of synthetic device. You need to kid yourself. So, Paul, Oblique Strategy cards, when did you first dabble, and are you still a user?
I'm definitely still a user. For my writing working life, I've neurotically relied on them. I've got my books with me now, and I have the books on my desk all the time. When I'm writing, I've got stuck, I'm useless, I can't think of anything. And then just that wonderful moment of a card, of another thing, can completely liberate you. And however illogical the suggestion seemed, you follow it. It's funny how the world's got more and more like a grand version of the Oblique Strategies. Google, with its tips and its suggestions and its randomisation of possibilities, almost seems like electronic amplification of the Oblique Strategies.
I've got my pack of cards as well. Let's just have a game of Oblique Strategies Snap.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got make a sudden, destructive, unpredictable action, incorporate.
That would mean that I guess I would completely answer a different question about a different subject completely, and I'd suddenly start talking about Manchester City in 1973. But I quite like that. Should I turn a card over?
You turn one over then, yeah.
When is it for?
When is it for?
Yeah, when is it for?
That's very good. That brings up this notion of, you should never try and write for posterity. But maybe you need to invert that idea occasionally.
Ah, yeah.
Have you ever sort of carried it into daily life?
A meeting with a bank manager?
With a bank manager in your love life?
That is where it still has a subversive quality, because I think if you did take it into your really deeply personal life, it would still cause some kind of rupture in the space-time continuum. I think I think it'd probably be good for love life and sexually, definitely. I think you've just suggested something wonderful. Does this suggest indeed, Simon, that you've been doing it this way?
I think that's the end of the interview, Paul. Thanks very much. I've never really applied these techniques to my own writing, and I suppose I'm always looking for ways of developing my voice or refreshing my voice, because I think that's what it's all about, not really about content. And I'm just wondering if these cards can provide that. I'm genuinely wondering whether these cards can provoke a different kind of poem. And I'm willing to give it a try. And I've got two poems which are in very early stages. Well, they're not even poems, they're just notes, really. One about a fire on a boat that I watched from a hotel window in Dubai. I just made some notes. I've written 3 wooden barges, chess piece skyline, can't read my writing, Mother's Day, Anyway, there's not a poem there yet. They're just, no, it's just an idea, but I don't know what to pin the idea on. And then this is even more unformed and inchoate. This is just, I just wanted to write a poem about getting older and to do with bones, feeling fatigue and weariness in the bone. And what have I written here? Staying later in bed each morning, puzzled by the zip on a new oh yeah, I realised that one. I was trying to do this zip up on a coat. I'd seen old men doing this, trying to fasten their zip like that, like they're trying to tie a fly, you know, as if they're going fishing or something. Anyway, that's as far as I've got with that poem. So I'll turn a card. Let's get them out of their little sarcophagus and turn it upside down. So, turn it upside down. Well, it's always the case, well, with me anyway, I can't get to it straight away. I need to let the subconscious do a little bit of work. I need to let the bread rise. So I'll put it to one side and come back later on. This is Corner House in Manchester, home to the Abandoned Normal Devices Festival, which took its name from an Oblique Strategies card. I've come to talk with its producer, Ruth.
I think when we meet with artists and say we want to commission a new piece of work, thematically we talk about abandoning normal devices in terms of technology. So we might ask them to work in a public space where they potentially don't normally do that. Classical composer Eilish Narayan, we proposed that she'd create a project online called The Hearing Test. She's actually going partially deaf. She crowdsourced a number of elements of the composition, trying to find new ways of working and new collaborators. So she collaborated with a technologist and worked solely online, which was a new way of working for her.
Could it work in a very perverse way? If you got somebody whose normal practice was very extreme or radical, if you're encouraging them to abandon normal devices, might they come up with something very traditional or twee?
It hasn't been the case so far, but potentially that could be a thematic one year.
They seem to me to tap into a word which is randomness. You hear the word random all the time now. I wonder why that's such a valuable concept these days in art.
I think it's in society in general, the idea of randomness. People are tired of what's come before and are interested in something that's more surprising.
Do you think it can lead to pretentiousness?
In what sense?
Falling back on, randomly generated ideas instead of letting concepts grow organically or sequentially.
I think there's always a chance of that within contemporary art, but what we try and do is take some of those ideas and make them more participatory so audiences can engage with it in a different way.
I've just been thinking how sort of infectious they are. Almost everything I see in the street now, I'm thinking, that would be a good card, cross the street or close one eye. Or
So now I have them online and getting that as well.
Do you think in some ways that's going against the spirit of them? I like the fact that there's something a little bit occult about them. They're like the tarot or something like that you're slightly dabbling in the unknown.
Yeah, they do have that quality to them. It's also time away from those devices that we use every day as well, the mobile phones and computers, so I think don't help creativity or creative thinking at times.
I should really try and talk to Brian Eno about these cards, but I've gone through the normal channels, the agent, the record label. He's not returning my calls, he doesn't get back to me. I suppose it's part of his image, really, enigmatic, a bit untouchable. So I'm abandoning normal devices and thinking of the internet as a huge pack of Oblique Strategy cards, and I'm just going to see what comes up. Okay, let's Brian Eno, contact address. Why contacting Brian Eno may not be a good idea. Are we to take it that you want to contact Brian Eno? Well, brackets, snigger. All we can say is, brackets, smirk. Good luck to you, brackets, guffaw. Nice. What about thinking in terms of Oblique Strategies, turning things upside down? I wonder if he's ever tried to contact me. Simon Armitage, Brian Eno. No. I think it's time for a card. It's become a bit like having a cup of tea or a cream cake, just for a bit of a sugar burst. Go outside, shut the door. Okay. Brian! 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 No, he's not in Huddersfield today. So there I was the other morning, with Diane Clark, double bassist with the Manchester Camerata Orchestra. Very pleasant it was too. I was there because Professor Tudor Rickards and his colleagues Louise Pinfold and Stephen Parry of the Manchester Business School were holding a workshop to see if they could use the cards to work out ways for the Camerata to increase its profile, much as any normal company might.
What's interesting also with the Oblique Strategies, we did something similar, the progress principle, and the students really find it engaging because they've sort of become trapped in the business world, and so it's interesting how you can use prompts to help them to get over blockers of business or marketing or finance.
Recently we've seen examples of opera productions being spilled out through national cinemas. Now I'm not sure where that idea came from, but I could imagine it might be the sort of idea that suddenly out of an oblique strategy meeting somebody says, why don't we use a completely different way of getting lots and lots of people to see this kind of high quality art?
But some of the cards I have read saying things like, is it really a mistake? That was one that stuck out at me, and I thought, actually, in our line of business, if you play wrong notes and wrong rhythms, it's a mistake.
Surely one person's mistake is another person's genius.
Totally. I mean, I agree, and in the world, any improvisational music, there is a large scope for that. But if you're doing a Mozart symphony and you play the wrong notes, it's just not genius.
I think
I'm still not entirely sure why cards created by and largely for artists might have a place in business, though I suppose that lateral thinker Edward de Bono was ploughing a similar furrow. So by the magic of radio, I'm going to whisk Tudor up to the cafe and get him to clear things up for me.
the majority of business people would find it very hard to have it suggested to them they could be more creative if they used a pack of cards. Once they try them, then there's a higher proportion of prepared to say there might be something in it. But generally, creativity is not considered something that fits in easily with most business people's mindsets.
Does a lot of this thinking go back to Edward de Bono?
De Bono's powerful metaphor is the idea of avoiding digging a hole deeper if you should be digging a hole somewhere else, or digging a hole at an oblique angle. So you can see the similarity. And some of the cards actually are not unlike injunctions that you might use using lateral thinking in a session for new ideas.
I wonder if you could retrofit oblique strategies into some of the great moments in science. So, for example, Newton and the apple, questioning why it didn't fall upwards. Is that an oblique strategy? I mean, the eureka moments.
I would connect them up. Of course, one of the people we look at for creativity in astonishing ways is Albert Einstein. He was very interested in creativity and how his own processes worked. Somebody said to him, well, how would you make decisions? And Einstein, rather mischievously, said, oh, well, I toss a coin. So I said, Professor, you toss a coin? He said, yes, and then I inspect what's happened and I see if I'm disappointed or not.
It's almost a technique for interviewing yourself, even if it's to discount a possibility.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm back in the meeting room. Before I left the room, I felt a little bit of resistance on your part. Has anything changed?
If you're talking about mistakes, no, I still stick to my guns. But I got the use of some of the cards.
Do you think sometimes with a process like oblique strategies, what it's actually doing is just articulating the obvious? That in some ways we always turn to these techniques if we're stuck.
Yes, in one word.
And you know the tune that you played before? Mm-hmm. If I were to turn a card over and give you that instruction, can we just see what happens?
Okay.
Who wants to select the card? I feel like a sort of table magician.
Right, and the card says, always first steps.
Can I offer you all a card? and just leave you with it, sort of thinking about how you're going to act for the rest of the day.
Okay.
Mine is remove ambiguities and convert to specifics.
Use an old idea.
I can't believe this one. Honour thy error as a hidden intention.
That was made for you.
It is.
I've been thinking about making the programme on the basis of what the cards say, so this will determine my next move.
I like it.
Emphasise differences. I like the way these cards have gone beyond their obvious targets, leapt over the fence if you like, so they're to be found in the boardroom as well as the recording studio, and the kitchen too. Ian Knauer is a celebrity chef in the States who's put them to the test in Gourmet magazine.
I thought it was a great idea. Anytime you need to be creative all the time, where it's your job, you will run into walls. And certainly, I can use all the help I can get.
How does this manifest itself in a kitchen environment? I mean, is it essentially about choosing different ingredients?
Not necessarily. It might be about technique or a different way to think about a traditional dish. So one example was a dessert. We pulled a card, and I think it was Be Extravagant. And so that made me think of cream. So we pulled another card, take something familiar and use it as an anchor. And I was walking through a grocery store, and I passed the dairy section, and I saw yogurt, a yogurt with fruit on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
So I made a panna cotta with the cream, but underneath it, I made a very quick strawberry jam. So both those strategy cards came into play there in sort of a whimsical way. You know, it ended up being this very refreshing, fun, playful dessert.
Did you bypass any cards? Was there anything that came up you just thought, well, that's a bit cerebral, I'm not sure how I can work that into a recipe, you know?
Well, there are a few that encourage you to take a step back from where you are, and some of those can be quite helpful, like go outside and close the door. But there's another one that is something like, you know, get your neck massaged, which, of course, you know, can actually be a pretty helpful thing, but as far as, you know, actually applying might not give me a direct idea.
Would you be able to taste an oblique strategy recipe?
Well, I think that's the beauty of them. They're oblique. If you were sitting down to this dessert I made, for instance, as the eater of the dessert, you don't need to really understand that creative process. The goal is to have a dish that is delicious and maybe has taken a different angle than we've seen before, but it has to be delicious. And if it isn't, then I think I've failed as a creative person.
Okay, so just a little oblique strategies moment here at the end. You're making an omelette, Ian, okay? And I've turned over a card for you here, and it is use an unacceptable colour.
So I immediately think of beets. If you would put beets in an omelet, they wouldn't be burgundy red. They would sort of be pink, Pepto-Bismol colored.
Yeah.
I think I might take some roasted beets and mix them with goat cheese and then use that as the filling of the omelet. So when you serve the omelet, you don't see what's inside, but then when you cut it open, you get these classic flavors that are not a color that you expect to see in the center of the omelet, but can still be really delicious.
That's great. I don't think I'll try it myself in the kitchen. Too many of my meals have got oblique strategy written all over them, I'm afraid. According to Keats, poetry should come as naturally as leaves to a tree, or it better not come at all. Well, it's all very well Keats saying that, but in truth it rarely comes as organically as that. Earlier in the programme, so a few days ago, I set myself the task of trying to use these cards to develop a couple of poems. One poem about a fire on a boat. To be honest, the cards just haven't helped. These images are too set. It was just introducing a further degree of difficulty, which, to be honest, I don't really need. With the other poem, though, I think they have been useful. I was trying to write a poem about, I suppose, growing old, and the card I turned over was Turn It Upside Down. I took this to mean try and find another perspective. So my first thought was to actually personify the bones and address them and have them as a sort of alter ego. But I kept reapplying Turn Things Upside Down, and in the end, I turned the whole poem upside down. Bones was originally in the title, now I've got it in the very last line. The poem, I think, is now more metaphorical. I also literally swapped the stanzas around, so the second stanza first, and I think that's added a certain curiosity. I think it's really had an effect. I don't know whether it's slightly being wise after the fact that, I've thought of a strategy and then noticed that it fits the instruction and then sort of congratulated myself on the idea that it's worked. But, one way or another, it's produced a poem, so I'm glad of that. Poor old soul. You'll enjoy it, I say, when next door's kid wants to take him to the park. I watch him puzzling with the leather buttons on his favourite coat, fingers like sticks of chalk. Coming home from a week abroad, I find him hunched and skeletal under a pile of clothes, a Saxon king unearthed in a ditch. We ran out of biscuits, he says, and the telly's on. I couldn't make it stop. When I throw back the curtains, morning bursts like a damn wall before he can open his old umbrella of epidermis and bone. So the cards have partially worked for me, and I might well use them again in the future if I get stuck. Certainly when guitarist Carlos Alomar was first asked to use them on that Bowie trilogy, he was an unlikely convert. 30 years and more on though, he's among their biggest fans.
Oh my God, you should say that. I teach over at Stevens Institute in New Jersey. I got the cards out, I framed them, and I put those cards all over the studio. When these students come in here to try to do some innovative experiment with sound, they will be blocked. And I need for them to be able to see what I saw and feel what I felt in the dilemma that I had when I had to come up with something out of nothing. And these cards for my students are like opening up an encyclopedia of thought that allows them to just approach it from a different way. And that is what you want, to be able to have many, many doors that open or that lead you to the same place.
Okay, I'll just give it one more go looking for Brian Eno. One more roll of the dice. One more card. Card says, try faking it. Try faking it. Okay. Hello, could I speak to Brian Eno, please? Hello, Brian. Yeah, it's Simon Armitage. How are you? Very good, thanks, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I quite like some of your own stuff as well. Yeah, so anyway, about these cards, Brian. Yeah, I was listening to Heroes the other day, and on that track Moss Garden? Yeah, no, I thought, I was listening to it, I was thinking, that must be an Oblique Strategy moment. Yeah.